a comfortable position. Take a deep breath and be at ease. Breathe easily and freely, drawing your breath up from the earth and exhaling it into the environment around you, drawing power from the earth, love, compassion, and exhaling it into the community that surrounds us. You are a conduit of the earth's power. We are literally made of nothing but things which come from this planet. There is no line where it ends and we begin. And every bit of power, strength, magnificence, beauty, and healing that the earth possesses, so do we. As you continue to breathe, draw that in. Remind yourself that you are part of it. This powerful, glittering jewel in this solar system. Drawing upon not only the power of the sun, but of every celestial body seen and unseen. We have so much to give. And the more we extend to others, the greater the vacuum within ourselves into which we may draw it. There is no end to that power, and you may give of it as freely as you are willing, and it will never run out. It will never go away. You will continue to be filled, restored, and healed by it. That is our one job, if anything. And your heart is at the center of it. Take one final breath and return. So back in the early 1900s, President Teddy Roosevelt's most famous policy, foreign policy, quote, was to speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far. You know, when you look at it on the surface, you know, it seems almost calculated. Like, I'm going to kind of keep my counsel to myself, but have this big giant weapon that I can help keep you in your place. But it is so much more profound than that. His foreign policy is commonly referred to today as big stick ideology. The broad idea behind that short phrase was actually that we should be well prepared and in ways that would make an opponent take notice, but that we also should act justly. Never bluff, and always leave your adversary with their dignity intact. Debating theology with people, or even arguing with those who have different belief systems of any kind, benefits from this same advice. be knowledgeable. And take the time to understand various viewpoints in advance, especially the ones that you disagree with the most. Not because it will change your mind, but it will change what you project. Because even while you might not agree with them, you respectfully understand the perspectives of the views they may hold. Never deceive and never behave in a passively aggressive way in the course of your arguments. And should you beat them in a contest, treat them with dignity, good sportsmanship, and respect, as is inherently due all humanity. Now, from my own theological viewpoint, all belief systems on this planet are worthy of dignity and respect, even the ones with which we heartily disagree. Now, this is not to say that we should treat with respect the interpretations of Scripture that allow for exclusion, disparagement, or oppression. But the Scriptures themselves are rarely responsible for how people choose to interpret them in order to accommodate and justify their own unloving viewpoints. In other words, Scripture never tells us to hate people, or even to love them while hating the sin. Once I engaged in an online discussion about religion with a couple of people who each told me what the truth was. It was interesting because there was no flexibility, no humility in their words. They claimed that they knew the one and only truth. And therefore, any deviation from their perspective was not only wrong, it was a lie. Now tell me, would you have thought, oh, well, then I better listen to this person? Gosh, they know the truth. What have I been doing all this time? That's not how humans work. So approaching it with the same angle, that same lack of humility, that same, I know the truth, the one and only truth, and all the rest is a lie, you can't expect them to open their hearts to that either. Even if you're right. There's no sharing of ideas or perspectives. There was only, I am right and you are wrong because it says so right here in the Bible. But the Bible, as it stands today, is far from an infallible document. In fact, there are so many thousands of opportunities throughout its centuries of oral tradition, translation, reprinting, editing, reframing, and even conscious misinterpretation, much of which today's believers are entirely unaware of, that it cannot be considered a perfect text. Now, I know that most of us actually know that already. But the thing that surprises me is the more that I dig into the nuances of how often something gets retranslated or represented, I'm astonished to realize the rabbit hole of just plain wrongness. Mainly because it's so confident in its position. The only thing that I think that we should maintain true, unadulterated confidence in is that love is the only metric through which we should be looking at any of it. And anything that doesn't align with love in one way or another, either we don't get it, it's been translated out of understanding, or it's wrong. Or it's historical fact. Because there's plenty of things that you can look at in the Bible and you're like, yikes, I would never do that. It doesn't correspond with love. So therefore it becomes a historical fact, not a suggested guideline for behavior. That's just what this group of people did at that time for their own reasons. So glad we don't do it like that anymore. Love should be the only thing that we double down on. Everything else should have humility. And as far as the Bible and its fallibility goes, does that mean it's not divine? Not necessarily. We are not capable of interpreting the divine in its entirety. Some might argue that literally every single text in the world that's filled with both truths and lies has a connection to the divine to it. If we are all extensions of the divine and we write anything that we feel like, what does that mean? Because I've often taken a look at that idea of scriptural infallibility and thought, what if there is something useful here, even if it's not necessarily truth as we understand it? Of how much value is the capacity to have discernment? And where do we learn discernment from, if not lies? When we look at somebody and somebody tells us something that we know isn't true, what kind of truth are we getting from them in that moment? And how much does that truth benefit us? I've told a story before about a kid that I used to be a mentor of, and he told me one day, "Oh, my uncle is leaving me his mansion and his yacht when he dies." And I was pretty certain that he didn't even have an uncle, much less a rich one. And so I didn't believe what he told me. But he told me so much truth in that moment. There was so much to see, so much that he would probably have really wanted me to know, but did not have the courage to communicate. And so he told it to me, this truth, with a lie. He told me that he needed to be seen, and that he needed to feel special, and that he didn't feel loved enough to have a beloved uncle leave them his wealth. But that he wished that there were somebody like that who loved him. That's an awful lot of truth in that line. That's discernment. We learn discernment through the lies that people tell us. And the only way we know is if our hearts are open enough to receive that truth as it's given, in the process of it being given. Which brings us to our version of religious diplomacy as inspired by Teddy Roosevelt's words. Speak softly and carry a big heart. You'll go far. Things about history are almost never quite as we think they are. For the Buddha, newsflash, was not fat, as is often depicted in his statues. Napoleon was not short. No. He was actually an inch taller than the average height of his time. Cleopatra was actually fairly unattractive. She must have had riz. And maybe a bit of wealth. And based on the cultural norms of Jewish men in the first century, Jesus almost certainly had short hair. In fact, the familiar image of Jesus with long hair and flowing robes comes from the Byzantine era, around the 4th century. And I don't know if you've noticed, fashions change a little bit faster than 400 years at a time. Byzantine representations of Jesus were symbolic. I don't know if this is probably not an appropriate story for here, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't know if you ever noticed the statue of David.
Yeah.
He has very big muscles, big hands, and very small something else. Now, do you think that was an accurate representation of the person David? No. Because when you look at statues that are not particularly well endowed, that is actually speaking not of their actual endowment. It's speaking of the taste that they had, the restraint that they had, that they were not acting out of their baser instincts. It's a symbol. It's not an actual representation of something physical, but rather that this was an individual of such good moral character that they did not resort to all of their base primal instincts when doing business in the world, that they had restraint. I like that idea. Because with Jesus and long flowing hair and robes, that's because of Zeus. Not because of Jesus. That's because the people who were depicting him from that time wanted us to understand something about that person in ways that are bigger than words or images. They were still describing a truth. But unless you have the key, you don't really know that that's the truth they were trying to explain. And in today's world, we would want to depict somebody as they were. We want a photograph, not a story in an image. Or at least we want to be able to derive that story for ourselves by what we see with our own eyes. But in times earlier, they understood. Oh, okay, well, when you depict somebody with long flowing hair and robes, that's hearkening to this idea, which makes this person more comprehensible to me. So now I get who that person was. I get what they were about, because they've depicted him with long flowing hair and robes. So we could call that a lie, or we could call that an opportunity for discernment, an opportunity to understand the nuances of what that imagery would mean in that time and space, and gain more truth from what would otherwise be thought of as a lie. So these misinterpretations then become handed down to us as though they are historical fact, when they are decidedly not. Which is interesting, considering the idea that people often see the face of Jesus with long hair and flowing robes in things like clouds and toast. How's that happen? If there's a divine hand in that, it's probably because God's like, okay, this is what you think he looks like, and so let's put it in your toast that way. Or maybe that's not what it is. Maybe it's just because the truth is we want to see it there. And we want to see it in a certain way. Or else we don't understand it. Because we are products of our own culture, who create symbols that speak truth to us. But there is no one single truth. Truth is subjective, at least from the perspective of any human being. And objective truth does exist about all these things, including the historical figure of David. But rarely does our own hindsight view of history enjoy the same. So maintaining humility and respect for the religious or ideological other, while being confident in your own awareness of the mistakes often made in the historical record, gives one an opportunity to listen to other people with a compassionate ear and a lack of hostility for their perspectives. We might not agree with those perspectives. We could talk about Charlie Kirk for a moment. That's a loaded subject. One could say, those who live by the sword die by the sword. We can also remember his family, who didn't necessarily sign on for this experience. We could remember that martyrs are never good, a never good idea, because then all our actions, thenceforth, become based in our anger and our rage. And that's never a good place to make any decision. And if we are a people who makes a practice of loving our enemies, how do we apply that here? Because it's our own heart that gets weighed down by that. It's our own soul, whatever that means, that feels the weight of our rage. That's why spiritual practices have in them these little hacks. Love your enemy. That's a hack. It's a hack designed to get you out of your head and into your heart so that you don't wound yourself further. Congratulating someone on their success rather than being envious of it, that's a hack. Jamie and I were just talking about this with Lavender and her fiance now, Brian, the other day. That the Islamic concept of mashallah is what you say to someone. You say mashallah when somebody says, oh, I just won the lottery. On one hand, you could be sitting there thinking, why didn't I win the lottery? God, why did they always get the good stuff? Mashallah is, I extend to you every and all congratulations. With a little thought behind it that maybe the angels are listening to me, congratulating the other so much that I resonate with that same amount of success, and then it comes to me too. Having an open heart is not as easy as the words I'm using. In short, be at ease with those who believe differently, even when they hate. Especially when they are unkind or inhospitable about it. What is true with or without our belief. But our first priority should not be the correcting of the record. It should be the correcting of our approach to our neighbor. Speak softly and carry a big heart. You will go far. Speak humbly and carry a big heart. It's like a balm to the frightened world we live in. And every single thing you do in that vibration will become resonant with it. Justice will prevail. Love will win. Peace will reign. And all shall be well. Please rise for our closing.